reports are coming out across ESPN that general managers are the new trend in college football. We see schools doing it all over the country. Tennessee has not. In the midst of not hiring a general manager, we saw the Nico Iamaleava debacle this year where he went to UCLA. We saw Ricky Gibson and Mike Matthews enter the portal and come back, clearly winning more money. We saw Boo Carter kind of threaten with the portal, even though he never did, but he released a tweet saying he's staying at Tennessee when no one even knew he was in the portal. And then Jacoby Thomas recently entered the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Is Tennessee falling behind the curve by not hiring a general manager for their football program?
It's hard to answer because if Tennessee had a general manager, would those things have happened anyway? I don't know. Here's my off-the-cuff thinking on that, is that if you have somebody that's playing the role of the general manager, they don't necessarily have to have the title as long as you're doing that. I would compare that to years ago when there were very, very few schools, Tennessee was one, that had a women's athletic director. Other schools had a senior athletic director in charge of women's sports. They did the same thing. Didn't matter what the title was, they did the same thing. So if you have somebody at Tennessee that is acting as a general manager but is not called that, I'm okay with it. But I do think you have to have somebody that's in a role that's out front with a lot of these things, that sees it coming and that doesn't get caught off guard. And that may be hard to do. But I'll go back to this. Would those things have happened if Tennessee had a general manager anyway? We don't really know. And so as long as they have somebody that acts in that role, I'm okay with you not calling that person a general manager. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I would agree if it wasn't for the fact that I feel like, and this is weird to say, I'm not so sure Josh Heupel should be the one to pick who acts in that role. When you're a head coach in the NFL, most of the time you don't get to pick your general manager. The owner still hires the general manager and makes that decision. And the reason I say that is, I know I've beaten the dead horse with Joe Milton and Hendon Hooker, but there's other examples of Josh Heupel, I think, missing on guys. I think you and I both noticed Josh Heupel has yet to sign an offensive lineman out of high school to start for him at Tennessee. Hasn't happened in 5 years.
Right.
And I am a little higher on him than you are, but you have major reservations now about Mike Matthews because he only had 7 catches last year as a 5-star. And so taking those things into account, even if there's somebody acting in that role, my concern is that Josh Heupel made the hire, chose who's going to act in that role, and that person that he's picked is not, if that's the case, is to this point, we have to say not doing that good of a job, right? In terms of identifying talent.
And here's the other thing, too. So the Patriots had a general manager, but Belichick ran the show, right?
Right.
So my flip side of what you're saying is, how many schools have a general manager in which the head coach is really running the show versus the general manager having autonomy separate from that coach? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a very intriguing question. And I'll also say this too, and you may have a better idea of this than I do since I'm trying to retire. I'm not doing a very good job of it. How many other schools have had players dip into the portal? I mean, so Arkansas, they signed this guy named, what was his name? Madden Iamaleava. And boom, 4 months later, he's going back to UCLA, the team that he snubbed on signing day. So what happened there? My point is, I don't know how many situations at other schools where they're running into issues like that. I know that when Saban left Alabama, there were a ton of people that entered the portal. Not all of them left, but some really good players did leave. So I don't really know if this is happening at a lot of other schools. I do pay attention to what's going on at Tennessee, but I don't really pay too much attention to what's going on at Southern Cal.
Well, the way I'll point it out to you is and I had Will West on about 2 Fridays ago, and he talked about how Tennessee is, they're not being forthcoming right now with the fact that they have some struggles on the NIL front compared to other schools. And their budget's not, according to Will, there are a couple of prominent boosters he's talked to that have, put it this way, I don't know why they thought this, but they thought they were going to get some sort of return on investment with opening up their opening up this money in NIL budget. Now, I don't know how you could think that. I mean, NIL money to bribe a player to come play for your school, there's no return on investment in that. You're doing it so you can see them win on Saturday. And
that's the return on the investment.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's not because you did a commercial for a car dealer.
Right, exactly. But some boosters at some places, and it sounds like Tennessee is one of them, thought they could get some sort of return on investment monetarily. Maybe not make back the money they spent, but at least lessen their loss, I guess is the way to say it. And I guess where I go with the NIL is if you are on a tighter budget than, say, Ohio State, which we know bought a national championship team last year, then the general manager is not just there to scout and evaluate talent. They also have to understand how to divvy up funds to a certain degree. And I mean, Jimmy, I don't know your experience with coaches, but I don't think most coaches are that great with math, honestly.
Unless it's their own pocketbook. To expect a return on that investment to me is kind of a pie in the sky thing. I will tell you that I was told that a significant booster who put a lot of money up so Tennessee could get Lance Hurd was not very happy about the return on the investment of his performance on the field. So that person wasn't very happy, I'm told. I haven't talked to him directly about that, but that's something that I've heard. Here's the other thing too with some of the players, and I again, I don't know about all the other schools. I do know that there were some Tennessee players that had NIL money that didn't show up and make appearances like they were supposed to.
Yes,
So
Nico was one of them.
Yeah, that might also be an issue with boosters donating to NIL. You were supposed to come do this, sign autographs. You're supposed to do this commercial. You're supposed to have this speech. You didn't do this, so I'm out. So I know that a little bit of that's going on. I don't know how widespread it is, but I know of several football players of which that would apply.
Yeah. So where I come in with this is, I'm not saying all, I'm not even saying most, but I will say some. I think we look at boosters, and I think us as a society genuinely make this mistake that if you have a lot of money, you must be smart. And I think the average IQ of billionaires is about the same as the average IQ of people making $30,000 a year. I don't think there's much difference. And so I think a lot of boosters, we thought them throwing money, many of them knew what they were doing. But truth be told, Jimmy, I think they were as clueless as the rest of us were over how this was all going to play out on the NIL front, by and large.
Yeah, probably. I also know some significant boosters that decline to donate to NIL because they don't believe in the principle.
Yeah, I've heard that. And then the talent, which is why they're probably really upset about Danny White's talent fee, right, that he's about to charge.
Yeah, and I don't like that talent fee because you've got a number of fans that probably don't agree with the concept either. I don't like what they're doing. I don't think if I disagree with a policy, I should not pay to help support that policy. And Tennessee's doing that, so I'm not a big fan of that. But yeah, you've got that going on with some fans, but you also have it with some huge boosters that have said, no, I'm not doing that. I don't believe in paying the players. And I don't know that they would, if there were some guardrails that were set in place, would they change their mind and help out a little bit? But they are not going to contribute to this Wild Wild West.
Yep, totally agree. Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, represented by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. It's up on the poll question. Vote now. How important is it for the Vols to hire a GM? Crucial or no need? Josh Heupels can scout fine. We'll dive into the results of that. First, a quick message from Banks & Jones.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott.
Jimmy, we've talked about this, but I don't think we've talked about it with you. So I'm going to throw this out there real quick. If Tennessee were to hire a GM, because again, my issue, getting back to it, I just don't think they're scouting the talent that well right now. He has a show cause. But what are your thoughts on the idea of Jeremy Pruitt's qualifications as a GM? Because I think we have to reevaluate and look back that while he can't coach, man, he scouted talent probably better than any head coach at Tennessee since Philip Fulmer, hasn't he? If you look at the players he found.
So do we have to wait on the $100 million lawsuit to be settled?
Maybe that's the agreement. Say we'll drop the lawsuit. Hey, if you drop the lawsuit, we'll hire you as a GM and put you back on a salary. He just needs money. So
I do think Pruitt brought in some good players. I do think that the Hyper regime did a better job of coaching them up than did Pruitt.
I do too.
Would Pruitt have a pretty good eye for some players? He would, I think. Now Tennessee still recruits on paper, what, top 12 in the country under Hyper on average. It is alarming that they have not been able to recruit offensive linemen that have stepped in and started. Now I thought Aiden Bussell?
Aiden Bussell.
Yeah, no, wait a minute. Who's the guy that went to Arkansas?
Oh, Addison Nichols.
Addison Nichols. I thought he was going to be a really good player at Tennessee. Then he goes to Arkansas. He starts at center. Now he's in the portal again. I don't know where he's ended up. But how does that happen? How do you let somebody like that get away? Was it NIL money? I don't know. But to say that you haven't been able to sign a high school kid to be a starter, that is a concern. I'm also concerned about the fact that whenever you go out and sign wide receivers, they don't produce in year one. That's another thing that's bothersome to me, which is why I'm concerned about this wide receiving core entering this season. So, but having said all that, there's no way there would be a second marriage with Pruitt. It's not going to happen. Do I think he's got a pretty good eye? I do. I've heard the name of Gerard Mayo being mentioned, and he's a guy that spent a lot of time in the NFL. I think he would be really good in that role of identifying talent. But I will say this too. It is hard to project. I think one of the hardest things to project is an offensive lineman in high school succeeding at the next level. But they got one that better. David Sanders.
Yeah.
He better. Because he's being plugged in as a starting right tackle. And if he's not very good, that's going to hinder the offensive line even more, an offensive line that has lost 4 starters.
Yeah, you're right. And I think part of the hard thing with Tennessee is that when you're not at the schools like Georgia, and now this is different in the NILH, I will say that, but I think that a Georgia or Alabama during the Kirby Smart, Nick Saban years, they not only can afford to just get the top talent, they're at a level where they can afford to be selective and really evaluate intangibles on players' character concerns that I think Tennessee couldn't. I'll just give you a quick, and I want to know your thoughts on this. I think one of the reasons for Tennessee's dip in the second half of Philip Fulmer's career, while the recruiting was still there, I think Philip Fulmer had to be he couldn't be as selective from a character perspective because Georgia had gotten Mark Richt and was taking away an easy pipeline for Fulmer to bring in talent, honestly, during that time. So it wasn't as easy to lure 5 stars as it was in the 90s.
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I also think, I've heard this, I'm not 100% on board, but I've heard some people say that Tennessee had so much success, they got lazy in recruiting a little bit. They didn't work as hard at it. I don't know. I think I'm right about this. So in the last 5 years of Fulmer's tenure, they had 2 losing seasons. In the last 5 years of his tenure, they played for 2 SEC championships. So it wasn't just a total collapse, but it certainly wasn't anything like what they enjoyed in the 90s. Because that 2004 team at Tennessee, the only team they lost to in the SEC was Auburn. That's a pretty good football team.
Yeah.
And you did that with 2 freshman quarterbacks. So, yeah. And then in 2005, when you ranked preseason number 3, you had a losing record. There was a lot of dissension on that team. Now, that had a lot to do with the Rick Clausen, Eric Ainge issue that was going on. So, and then they bring Cutcliffe in. They do very well for 2 years, and then he leaves, and then they're back in the doldrums. So, but the talent level, they weren't producing high level talent, first round draft picks in the last 5 years like they did previously under Fulmer.
Yeah, and I think part of that is there were concessions made for players that Philip Fulmer in the 90s never would have made. I mean, you know this. I know it. I'm sure you know it. The stories that he wasn't about to roll out the red carpet for Brian Darden, even though Brian Darden was a really highly touted running back. And it was, hey, if you can't play, you can't play. But it did feel like he made concession after concession for a James Banks, for instance, 7, 8 years later when James Banks never should have warranted the concessions that were made for him at that time.
Yeah. And I think he ended up at Carson Newman, didn't he?
He did, and not making it into the NFL because, which I mean, the biggest waste of raw talent I think ever in Tennessee was James Banks.
He was a very talented player. Heck, he started the game. I remember when Clausen got hurt, and Banks, it might have been against Georgia that he started. But he was a very good athlete that had some issues, and there were some other issues from other players later in the former regime that may contribute to the argument that you're making about how they didn't care as much about character as they did. Can you help me win a football game?
Right.
But there was those last few years were, and I think that I think he missed Cutcliffe. I think that was a part of it. I thought David was a really good member of the staff that handled some of the discipline issues. Frankly, I thought so. Probably a combination of that, a combination of the staff, and also maybe recruiting some undesirables.